Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. You can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 142 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on what happens when therapists are attracted to clients. So this topic I thought was really fun, and it's also really interesting because there's so many different things to actually consider. And to be honest, I was actually rather surprised at the length of the blog post, which I wrote up for today's episode, but this is filled with some good information, and it's also really interesting to actually get some perspective, not only for us and our fellow therapists, whether future or current, but it's also interesting to hear about it from our client's perspective, as this is a really interesting podcast episode. And it is Friday, the 1st of April 2021, as I record this. 2022, sorry. So, moving on to the psychology news section, we've been from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is absolutely brilliant because I've actually got some personal experience with it. So the first one is, when the school day starts later, teens get better sleep and feel more motivated. Getting out of bed is the first major hurdle of most teens' weekdays, often assumed to be the product of laziness or moodiness. This difficulty rising in the morning is actually due to adolescent sleep patterns. During teenage years, circadian rhythms are relatively delayed, causing teenagers to both go to sleep and wake up later in the day. Even so, schools in the UK still demand that teens attend lessons from 9 a.m. or earlier, whilst high schoolers in Germany or the US may start as early as 7:30 a.m. Wow, that's early. This holds students to early rise times that are more suitable to those in other age groups. In an attempt to compensate for the lost sleep during the week, teens often oversleep on weekends and reduce sleep overall, as poor sleep routines are associated with cardiovascular issues, mood disorders, substance abuse, and more. It's easy to see why improving sleep in teens is an appealing target. But what if school starting times worked with rather than against teenage sleep requirements? So this is actually really interesting because I actually had some personal research experience with this. Because back when I was in sixth form, which is the 16 to 18-year-old education system here in the UK, my psychology teacher told us that some researchers from the University of Oxford would actually be coming in to actually conduct research on this very topic, which they didn't end up doing it. But then I actually read into the literature more, and this is very, very true. And to be honest, the great shame about this is that because no governments are ever research based, this will sadly never change. And if it does, it will be amazing, because this really would help teenagers to actually learn better, which therefore has tons of other impacts. Positive impacts on the economy, people's lives, and etc. But I just don't think this would ever happen because in my experience, the political changes that would need to happen because of this would literally never happen. So the second one is, embracing discomfort rather than avoiding it can help us work towards our personal goals. In order to develop new skills or grow as a person, you often have to get out of your comfort zone. Say that you want to become a better public speaker, you would have to get up and practice speaking in front of others, and that will likely feel awkward and uncomfortable at first. Yep, I will never do that. Or not unless I absolutely have to. This can create barriers to personal growth, because those feelings of discomfort that you experience will come well before you notice any improvement in your skills. As a result, you might feel that the negative emotional experience is not worth it, and you would give up on the goal. But what if we reframe our attitude towards discomfort, seeing it as a sign of progress and something to strive for rather than avoid? A new paper in Psychological Science just suggests that this way of thinking can actually motivate people to work towards their goals. So that's actually very interesting, because as we know from clinical psychology, And lots of other areas of within psychology, reframing topics and reframing tougher situations can actually be very, very powerful. So yes, that's definitely something to consider if we do want to improve ourselves. And the final one is, here's how our ability to empathise changes as we get older. How does our age affect our ability to empathise? Some researchers think about our ability to understand and respond to others' feelings follows an inverted U-shaped pattern, with empathetic skill peaking in middle age before declining again in older age. But Michelle Kelly at the University of Newcastle and her colleagues point out in their paper in Neuropsychology, findings in this field have been mixed. Their new work on 131 adults aged 17 to 94 suggests that whilst people over the age of 65 aren't quite as good as cognitive empathy, working out what someone is likely to be feeling, they are just as good as feeling with others. So empathy is always very critical of whatever age we are. But if you've ever done personality psychology before, well, then you might remember that the number of personality traits, traits that decline and actually increase at different stages of our lives. And of course, empathy is not a personality trait, but it just shows that our behaviour can actually change it depending on our age. So very important to actually research that and actually consider it. So that's enough for psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has actually been a very strange week that we're not only because of my mum has had a COVID, but thankfully she's fine now. So I've had to be looking after her and doing other stuff but I've also launched a Kickstarter for my fiction, and I know that I never talk about my fiction on this podcast, but it was such a major event this week because the project funded it in 3 days, which has never happened before. And a Kickstarter itself, which is a crowdfunding platform. But I actually labelled it as a project we love, which is a very major thing, because basically it means that they think that it's excellent and they actually want to highlight it. So I'm really pleased about that. So if any of you were interested in fantasy books, then definitely check out my Kickstarter. And they do make great gifts. There'll be a link in the podcast description. But besides from those two things, I'm actually really looking forward to going to London next week, because I'm going to a major international conference. So that will actually be really good. That I'd like to see everyone and hear some really interesting talks. And what will most probably happen is that I'm not going to tell you the actual name of the conference yet, but I'll do that next week. But I will most probably find some stuff to reflect on, which it won't be enough a podcast episode, but it probably will be for some of my reflective books. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment on the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Psychology of Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationships, and more. 3rd edition. So this is an absolutely brilliant book, which is the perfect sponsor for today's episode, because not only does this really engaging book actually focus on friendships and the biological, cognitive and social reasons for why friendships and romantic relationships develop, but then it also goes on to other stuff like bystanderism, communication, and why relationships are changing and so many more great topics. So if you really enjoy today's episode, then definitely check out this book, because it really does build upon it, and you will be able to understand the more general concepts at a much deeper level. So that is Psychology of Relationships, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback, large print and hardback version from Amazon at your local bookstore or local library if you request it. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be looking at what happens when therapists aren't attracted to a client. So this is a really good podcast episode that I cannot recommend enough. But before we dive into the actual study that inspired today's episode, I actually just want to mention though why are we actually looking at this topic. So to be honest, there are 2 main critical reasons why we need to look at this topic. Firstly, because our clients will become concerned about finding the right therapists for them. And whilst there are plenty of tried and tested methods for helping them with that, and we've actually spoken about that on the podcast episode before, some clients will still be concerned about will they be comfortable, will they like the therapist, and amongst other things. And this is even more important when it comes to clients with a history of emotional and / or sexual abuse, since they will be concerned about history repeating itself. Secondly, it is perfectly normal for therapists to find a client attractive from time to time, and there are caveats, and I promise you that I will actually get into them later on. Since you can easily compare it to doctors, nurses, or whoever looking at a patient walking through a doctor's surgery. Then between themselves, they might say, "Oh yeah, he's hot, he's he's handsome, etc." But that's it. Of course, this might not be strictly professional, but it happens, and this is where the research comes in. So this is what actually happens. So it actually turns out that lots of therapists do experience occasional sexual or romantic feelings towards their clients, but only an extremely small percentage actually do anything about it, as well as act on them. And this is what a new study by Nessa et al. 2020 had discovered. And this their study that will actually be the focus of today's episode. And as always, if you want any of the references from today's podcast episode, then just go to connorwhiteley.net /podcast and find episode 142. We will quickly explain what they did. They sent a 15-minute long survey to Belgian psychotherapists, and it contains sections on intimate feelings and behaviours related to sexuality and friendship towards a client, as well as another section that looked at the participants' sexuality, relationships, or friendships with patients, and how many of them they had in the past year or their entire career. Then finally, the survey collected the participants' demographics, for example, their education level, their sexuality, gender and age, therapist feelings and behaviours towards their clients. The first section of the survey found the response rate was 40%, giving them a total final sample of 758 mental health professionals. Then naturally, because of the whole psychology demographic, 69% of them were female, 89% of them were heterosexual, and 83% of them were between the ages of 20 and 59. Then in terms of behaviour, it turns out that 71% of the therapists said that they sometimes or regularly found one of their clients sexually attractive, and about 23% of them actually fantasised about having a romantic relationship with them, but an additional 4% fantasised about having sexual contact with a patient. Now, interestingly enough, it was very common for therapists to develop friendship-related behaviours and feelings towards their clients. For example, 80% of our therapists had accepted gifts from a client, and 72% of them had a perception of feeling like a client was a friend. Personally, I think that this is extremely interesting because this would play into the therapeutic alliance, since both the therapist and the client need to be comfortable in front of each other. Mainly so the client wants to reveal their past and things about themselves, so the therapist can start helping them to relieve their psychological distress. Therefore, whilst this might sound bad or very shocking, and to be honest it is, I think that there are benefits to the therapist feeling like friends with the client, as that helps both parties strengthen the therapeutic alliance. Then this only becomes dangerous or bad if one party takes it too far, which is what we'll talk about in a moment. Therapists, clients and friendships. In addition, only 15% of the surveyed psychotherapists had started a friendship with a client, and mostly the surveyed therapists had only started this friendship after the therapy had ended, which of course is a lot better because it ensures that no boundaries were broken. However, only 3% out of the entire sample had started a sexual relationship with a client, and only 1% of the sample had done this during therapy. And of course, this 1% would be quite dangerous, and it'd be really unethical, and to be honest, I just don't know why you would want to do it, because you would basically be risking your job and your career. because if you were found out to do that, you would be pretty much blackballed within psychology and you would not be able to get another job. And to be honest, you would probably, because you would also have your license stripped away from you. Well, most probably. So, just don't do that. Seriously, don't. Boundary violations by a therapist. So after looking at this study, I think that we can all feel confident in saying that many therapists can experience occasional sexual thoughts, feelings or fantasies about people where they are treating, as well as 7 out of 10 therapists, more men than women, found a patient sexually attractive, and nearly a quarter of therapists had fantasies about being in a relationship with their patients. Thankfully, so few therapists actually violate boundaries with their clients, since the study found that less than 1 in 30 therapists actually crosses the line in and out of that dangerous area. Also, even in these cases, it tends to only be one client in their entire career. So, people were doing this in a series, and the patterns of our behaviour is actually almost unheard of, which is actually quite good. And then there are other studies that actually support these findings. Because studies like Garrett and Davis 1998 have also found similar rates. Overall, these sexual fantasies and feelings might be common, but acting on them is rare. And that's what I actually wanted to talk about this topic, because I wanted to dispel any myths around therapists preying or hooking up with a client. Why do therapists feel strong connections with their clients? So that's definitely one of the biggest questions that this entire topic has actually prompted us. So the reason for this is probably because therapists and clients spend a lot of time alone together in a room. Here, the client and the therapist talk about extremely personal and intimate details of their lives, as well as we know from social penetration theory by Ullman and Taylor 1973. When communication moves from a shallow level to a deeper level of personal disclosure, people will tend to feel closer, as well as with a therapist always attending these sessions with empathy and without judgment. This environment is very conducive to intimate feelings developing. But then if we flip this over, so we focus on other clients themselves, they are made to develop romantic or sexual feelings for the therapist for the same reason. Why are male therapists more likely to start a relationship with a client? And this was one of the more subtle, questions than the Nessa and 20 or 22 actually found out. So there were 3 reasons for this. So there were 3 reasons for this, which I'll tell you about now. So the first one is that men tend to experience stronger and more frequent sexual desires, or it's because they are exposed to a lot more opportunities for sexual attraction, since the vast majority of male therapists are heterosexual, and the majority of therapy clients are women. Although that is probably just because of all the nonsense that society makes out about men having to be tough, don't show emotion, and all of the other utter nonsense that is spread about to actually stop men from getting the help that they need. But anyway, though, that's just one of my little soapboxes. Nevertheless, there is a third possibility here, which relates to power, which is what the authors note. Open a quote. The need or ability to dominate and control can also play a role in cases of sexual abuse. Studies of gender differences have shown that men overall desire power more and possesses higher levels of power. Close a quote. Of course, the entire point of this podcast episode is not to give men a bad name, since the vast majority of men are amazing, wonderful, and very good people. But it is always the tiny minority that gives the majority a bad name. That positions of power, like a therapist, always attracts the fewer predators, just like doctors, teachers, and church people. Therefore, the last point is something to just bear in mind, and remember that not all men are like that. Conclusion. So personally, I always like to look at people's sexual interest, relationships, and how social psychology can impact people. So when I found this research that intersected with clinical psychology, I just had to do an episode on it, and I'm really glad that I did. Since, if anything else, I really hope that this has set your mind at ease, whether you're a future or current therapist that it is normal to feel sexual feelings towards your client, and it doesn't make you some weird, awful person. But it is important to bear in mind that unethical uses of power and of relationships can occur, and that is something we must all be vigilant against. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and that you got something out of it. Like I know that I did, and I really enjoyed it. So I hope that you would do too. If you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out Psychology of Human Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationships, and more, third edition. It's a great book that I cannot recommend enough, and it's available in all of the usual places. But if you didn't want to buy a book, but you still wanted to give the podcast a bit one-time support, then please go to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.